Emma wasn't expecting her name to appear in her boss's email that morning. She had only been working at the firm for a year, quietly doing her job, keeping her head down, and never stepping too far outside her role. When she read Daniel's message asking her to accompany him to a business conference in Seattle, her stomach turned with nerves. It wasn't that she disliked him, quite the opposite. Daniel had a way of carrying himself with calm confidence that made people listen when he spoke. To Emma, he was more than a boss. He was someone she admired, though she would never admit it aloud. The days before the trip moved quickly. She packed her simple clothes, rehearsed polite conversation, and tried to prepare herself for being around him outside of the office. The thought of sharing the same hotel, sitting in meetings, walking through airport sits, all felt bigger than she could handle. Still, she reminded herself this was work. Nothing more. At the airport, Daniel greeted her with an easy smile, holding his coffee cup like it was an extension of his hand. He wore a dark suit, travel bag slung over his shoulder, looking every bit like the man who always seemed in control. Emma managed a polite hello, clutching her ticket a little too tightly. On the plane, they sat side by side. Daniel spoke about the schedule for the next few days: early meetings, networking dinners, late-night planning sessions. His voice was steady, but every now and then his eyes flicked toward her, as if checking to see if she was overwhelmed. By the time they landed, the rain in Seattle was already falling hard. Their car ride from the airport to the hotel was quiet, filled with the soft hum of traffic and Daniel scrolling through his phone. Emma stared out the window at the wet streets, neon lights reflecting against the glass. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to step into a world that didn't quite feel like hers. The hotel lobby was warm, filled with the low buzz of travelers and the scent of fresh coffee from a small cafe near the entrance. Emma followed Daniel to the desk, her eyes wandering over the grand chandeliers and the polished marble floor. Everything seemed a little too bright, a little too perfect. As they checked in, Daniel glanced at her, his tone gentle. "It's been a long day. Let's just get some rest. Tomorrow, everything starts." His words were simple, but the way he said them felt grounding, like he could sense her nervous energy. When she reached her room, she dropped her bag onto the chair and stood by the window, watching the city lights blur through the rain. She thought about how strange it was to be here, miles away from home, staying in a hotel with her boss. It wasn't improper. He had his room, and she had hers, but the closeness of it all stirred something unsteady in her chest. Emma told herself not to read too much into things. This was business, nothing personal. But as she laid down that night, listening to the rain tapping against the window, she couldn't help but wonder why he had chosen her out of all the employees he could have brought along. Maybe it was just chance. Maybe it was because she was available. Or maybe her heart whispered a thought she quickly pushed away. She closed her eyes, knowing the real test would come tomorrow. The days ahead would be filled with meetings, late nights, and endless work. Yet deep inside, Emma felt something shifting, as if this trip was about to change more than just her job. It would change how she saw Daniel and maybe even how she saw herself. And with that thought, she drifted into sleep, unaware of just how much the days ahead would challenge her heart. The conference began early, and Emma quickly realized just how demanding it would be. From the moment they stepped into the hotel ballroom, filled with people in suits and the constant hum of conversation, she had no time to think about her nerves. Daniel walked with his usual calm stride, shaking hands, exchanging quick words, and introducing Emma whenever the chance came. She stayed close, taking notes, organizing schedules, and quietly making sure everything he needed was at hand. But through the chaos of that first day, Emma noticed something she hadn't expected. Daniel paid attention not only to the big things, but also to her. When she reached for a chair in the crowded meeting hall, he pulled it out before she sat. When he saw her coffee cup empty during a break, he handed her a fresh one without saying a word. And when she stumbled slightly while juggling her laptop and files, he steadied her arm with a small, almost protective gesture. None of it was dramatic, but every little thing carried a weight that Emma couldn't ignore. By noon, she was exhausted. Her head pounded from the endless introductions, the buzzing voices, the long-winded speeches. Yet Daniel never let her fade into the background. During one panel discussion, when she offered a quiet idea, someone interrupted, brushing past her words. Daniel immediately redirected the room. "Let Emma finish," he said, his tone firm but polite. And suddenly, all eyes turned to her. Emma's face flushed, but she continued, giving her thought clearly. When the panel ended, Daniel leaned toward her and whispered, "That was a good point. Don't let anyone cut you off again." His words were simple, but the look in his eyes told her he meant it. For the first time in a long while, she felt not just like an assistant, but like someone who mattered. The afternoon stretched long, with presentations and networking sessions stacked one after another. Emma kept pace, writing notes and managing the flow, though her body begged for rest. She glanced at Daniel now and then, wondering how he managed to keep his energy steady. There was something about him that made people listen. Not just because of his position, but because of the quiet authority he carried. Still, when his gaze occasionally met hers across the crowded room, softened in a way that unsettled her heart. That evening, after the last session ended, Daniel suggested they step into the hotel lounge. The space was dimly lit, quiet compared to the day's noise, with soft music playing in the background. Emma hesitated, unsure if it was appropriate, but he gestured lightly, as if to say she had earned the break. They sat across from each other, the exhaustion between them finally giving way to something calmer. "You've done more than I expected today," Daniel said, his voice low, carrying the kind of sincerity that made Emma's chest tighten. She gave a small laugh, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm just doing my job." But he shook his head, leaning slightly forward. "No, you're doing more. You kept things running when they could have fallen apart. And I saw the way you handled yourself in those meetings. Don't downplay it." Emma felt her cheeks warm under his gaze. She wasn't used to such direct praise, especially from him. Her instinct was to dismiss it, to move the conversation elsewhere. But something about the way he looked at her made her pause. There was no rush, no businesslike edge, just honesty. The waiter brought their drinks, breaking the moment. They sipped quietly, the silence between them oddly comfortable. Emma stole a glance at him, noticing how the dim light softened his features. He looked tired, yes, but there was still a calm strength in him that made her want to keep listening, keep learning. When they stood to leave, Daniel walked beside her toward the elevators. Neither spoke, but the unspoken weight of the day lingered. At her door, he gave a small nod. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be even busier." Emma smiled, clutching the key card in her hand. "Good night, Daniel." She stepped inside her room, closing the door softly behind her. She pressed her back against it, heart racing. The day had been nothing more than work, yet it didn't feel like just work anymore. Every small moment, his quiet gestures, his firm defense of her voice. His words in the lounge had built something she couldn't quite name. Lying in bed, she tried to push the thoughts away. He was her boss. This was professional. But as she drifted to sleep, one truth pressed against her heart. Sometimes it wasn't the grand moments that changed everything. It was the small ones that meant the most. The third morning of the trip began like the others' early alarms, quick coffee, and another full day of meetings. Emma was getting used to the rhythm, though her body begged for more rest. She told herself to stay focused, to keep her thoughts on work. But deep down, she couldn't forget the way Daniel had looked at her the night before. It had been only a few words, a quiet moment in the lounge, yet it lingered in her mind. That evening, when the last session ended and she returned to her room, Emma noticed an envelope slipped under her door. Her name was written neatly on the front in Daniel's handwriting. Curious, she carried it to the small desk and opened it. Inside was a folded note and a small box, wrapped simply in silver paper. Her hands trembled as she read the note. "Emma, sometimes words aren't enough. Thank you for everything you've done these past days and for the way you've stood beside me. Daniel." Emma set the note down carefully, her heart racing. She untied the paper and lifted the lid of the box. Inside lay a delicate silver bracelet, polished and shining under the warm light. Attached to it was a small charm, shaped like a star. It wasn't extravagant, but it was thoughtful, personal in a way that made her chest ache. She turned the bracelet over in her hands, struggling to understand what it meant. Was this just a gesture of gratitude or something deeper? He could have sent flowers, a card, or simply said thank you, but instead he had chosen something she would carry with her. Something that spoke without words that night. When Daniel invited her to meet in the quiet corner of the hotel restaurant, she carried the bracelet on her wrist. The silver glimmered softly under the lights, catching his eye as soon as she sat down. "Why would you give me this?" she asked, her voice steady, but her heart anything but calm. Daniel's gaze held hers, calm and unflinching. "Because you've been my light these past few days. I don't want you to forget how much you matter, not just to the work, but to me." Emma froze, unsure how to respond. The weight of his words pressed into her, deeper than she had expected. She searched his face, looking for any hint of insincerity, but there was none. His expression was steady, his tone gentle, and in that moment she believed him completely. The restaurant was nearly empty, the sound of clinking glasses fading into the background. Emma lowered her eyes, her hand brushing over the bracelet. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to," Daniel replied softly. "Just wear it, that's enough." The silence that followed was heavy, but not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that carried meaning, the kind that said more than words ever could. Emma felt her heart swell with emotions. She wasn't ready to name gratitude, admiration, maybe something even stronger. When they stood to leave, Daniel walked beside her, close enough that she could feel the quiet steadiness of his presence. At her door, he paused, his eyes lingering on the silver bracelet one last time. "Good night, Emma," he said, his voice low but warm. She smiled faintly, her heart trembling. "Good night, Daniel." Back in her room, Emma sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the bracelet. She thought about every small moment of the past few days, the chair he pulled out, the coffee he brought, the way he defended her voice, and now this gift. Each piece built into something undeniable, something that stirred in her more deeply than she wanted to admit. It wasn't just a bracelet, it was a promise. A reminder that sometimes the most meaningful connections aren't spoken out loud, but felt in the quiet gestures that stay with you long after the moment has passed. As the city lights glowed through her window and the bracelet rested against her wrist, Emma realized she was no longer just an assistant on a business trip. Something had shifted, something she could not ignore. The question now was whether she was ready to face what it truly meant. The last night of the trip came faster than Emma expected. The conference was finally over. The endless meetings and conversations had ended. And for the first time in days, she felt the weight lift from her shoulders. But the heaviness in her chest wasn't gone. It came from something else. The bracelet around her wrist, the note tucked safely in her bag, and the look in Daniel's eyes that still echoed in her memory. That evening, Daniel asked if she wanted to take a walk through the hotel's quiet garden terrace before they packed for the flight home. Emma agreed, though her heart raced at the thought of being alone with him again. The rain had stopped, leaving the air crisp, the stone paths glistening under soft lights. They walked slowly, side by side, neither rushing to speak. Emma held her coat tight, trying to calm her thoughts. She knew this moment mattered. She could feel it in the silence between them, the way their footsteps seemed to move in rhythm, the way his presence steadied her even when words were absent. Finally, Daniel stopped near a bench under a lantern. He turned toward her, his eyes finding hers in the soft glow. His gaze lowered briefly to the bracelet on her wrist. "It suits you," he said quietly. Emma's throat tightened. "I still don't understand why you gave it to me." Daniel's voice was calm but carried an emotion she hadn't heard before. "Because I wanted you to know that you're more than just an employee to me. You've been my support, my voice when I couldn't speak, my calm in the middle of the storm. I didn't want this trip to end without you knowing that." Emma felt her chest rise sharply, as if his words had unlocked something she had been holding back. She searched his face, wondering if she had misread him, if she had imagined the feelings building between them. But the honesty in his eyes told her she hadn't. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice almost trembling. "You don't need to say anything," he replied gently. "I only wanted you to know." For a moment they stood in silence, the night air wrapping around them. Emma's heart raced, torn between fear and the pull of something she couldn't deny. She wasn't naive. He was her boss, and the world outside this hotel terrace would be far less forgiving. But here, in this quiet space, it didn't feel like a mistake. It felt like truth. Emma lowered her gaze to the bracelet, her fingers brushing over the charm. "This means more than you know," she said softly. Daniel gave a faint smile, his voice tender. "Then keep it as a reminder. No matter where we go from here, you'll know what I couldn't put into words." The night stretched between them, filled with unspoken emotions. They walked back to the hotel, slower this time, neither in a hurry to reach the end. When they arrived at her door, Daniel paused, his hand resting lightly against the frame as if holding the moment still. "Good night, Emma," he said, his voice carrying a weight that felt final yet full of promise. Emma's eyes lingered on his, her heart aching with words she couldn't bring herself to speak. Instead, she smiled gently. "Good night, Daniel." He turned and walked down the hall, his figure fading into the quiet. Emma stepped inside her room, closing the door softly behind her. She leaned against it, her heart pounding. The bracelet glimmered under the light, and she knew it wasn't just a gift. It was something deeper, an unspoken bond, a quiet beginning. Lying in bed, she thought of everything that had happened, the long days of work, the small gestures, the note, the gift, the terrace conversation. None of it was grand or loud, but together it had built something powerful, something that couldn't be explained with simple words. When morning came, it would board the plane, return to their office, and step back into the world where everything demanded professionalism. But Emma knew the truth. This trip had changed her. She carried not just memories, but a quiet hope. The bracelet on her wrist was proof that sometimes the most important stories don't begin with declarations, but with a gift that speaks louder than words. And as the city lights faded into dawn, Emma realized that what mattered most wasn't what had been said, was the promise of what could still come.